Welcome back. So pray that I can say this with some coherence that will be truthful and healing in your lives, because if it doesn't have that effect, it's just mere theology, and we don't need mere theology. I'd like to begin with several quotes from, I keep mentioning the fathers of the church, who most of us weren't educated in, but there was a certain kind of purity in the early centuries, where they weren't the victims of as much of history as we are victims of. I'm going to quote several of them again. These are largely known as Eastern Fathers. One is St. Maximus the Confessor, 6th century. Here's what he says: God made all beings to this end, to enjoy the same union of humanity and divinity that was united in Christ. Strong. St. Gregory Palamas, 13th century. God revealed the Christ in Jesus so that humanity could never be separated from the pattern that he portrayed. So we've got to see Jesus and Christ as every man, as every woman, as the universal pattern. Even Carl Jung said that. He said the life of Jesus is almost a perfect map of every human journey. A hidden divine conception that no one knows about, just like you were conceived in your mother's womb, already beloved from the moment of your conception. But we have no knowledge of it, and the whole rest of our life is gaining that knowledge. Could it be true that I'm God's child, that I'm God's beloved? And I believe, you don't have to agree with me on this, I don't think it's an orthodox position in any sense, but I'm of the belief that it was only the risen Christ that in his mind usually fully knew that he was the Son of God. I think he had to walk in faith, as the letter to the Hebrews says, just like you and I. And when on the cross he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? He wasn't just pretending. He felt that, just like you feel it. And then walking the journey of largely 30 invisible years, where we know nothing about him at all. The only break-in story is his self-created bar mitzvah at 13, where he goes to the temple to have the elders teach him. And this is a critique of not just Jewish religion, but all religion. The elders have nothing to say to him. They don't know how to initiate him into wisdom. He ends up teaching them. You're supposed to be shocked by that. A boy teaching the old men, because the old men are stupid. Does that sound like any pattern that continues in our time? I mean, wisdom can come from surprising places. And then he lives a life of the usual disagreements, hostility, betrayal, abandonment, rejection. But basically, during his 3 public years, all he does is teach and heal, teach and heal. And I mean, to use our language, he's providing free health care. And now we're not even for that anymore, you know. No, we don't want health care for the poor. Well, Jesus spent his whole life. That's what I mean about the great comma. Huh? When you ignore Jesus' life, you don't realize the patterns he gave us, where he cared about human suffering in this world. That is 2/3 of the synoptic gospels. Huh? There's no talk about, I'm sending you to heaven. He's healing them from their suffering in this world. You go back and read the gospels. Huh? Our capacity to miss what's in plain sight is phenomenal. Huh? And our pushing it off into the next world probably did more than any single thing to make the gospel very anemic, very powerless to really change people. It just became a club to join. And you were told what club you should join by what country or state you were raised in. It wasn't a search for love, search for God, or a search for truth. Then St. Athanasius. Now, Athanasius, in the 4th century, he is called the father of orthodoxy. So listen to what the father of orthodoxy says. And I mean orthodoxy in the generic sense, all of us. God in Christ became the bearer of flesh, so that humanity could become the bearer of Spirit forever. God became man, Irenaeus says, so that man might become God. Now, this doctrine in Orthodoxy was called Theosis, or Theosis, the divinization of the human person. At least when you start with that as the goal, do you see how different that is than starting with the meaning of baptism is to wash away original sin, where the goal of the whole journey is to become like God. We're almost afraid to say that. And yet that's what Christ eyes give you. You know, when I was a little boy and we'd ask the nuns what heaven was like, and they'd say, oh, you're going to look at God for all eternity. And to a little boy, that didn't sound very exciting at all. I thought, well, won't I get bored about the third year into it? You know. But as I try to say in this book, what if it's to see with the eyes of God, not to see God? What if you could look at everything your eyes have ever seen with the eyes of God? That seeing would never stop. Well, that would be, for me, the beatific vision. So, once we can recognize that Jesus is the stand-in for everybody, for everything. He's the corporate personality. That's the word they gave us in theology. He's the everyman or every woman. And once we can read his life as a map, instead of those of you who believe in him are going to go to heaven and those of you who don't. Well, how do you believe in him? By following the map. And if you're ignoring people's need for healing or the poor, then you're not following the map. You see, it becomes rather simple or straightforward in a way. Now, with that as a bit of a preface, I want to read. I know I never speak very well when I directly read, but it might be a little more accurate because I took time to say these things. I'm going to read to you from chapter 13 on the resurrection. And of all things, I begin with a quote from John Lennon. Even the Beatles have some wisdom. Well, they had a lot of wisdom, I think. He said, everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay yet, it's not the end. Brilliant, brilliant. See, that's what the resurrection was supposed to say. We're giving you the final chapter of history in the middle of history. And God's job description is to take everything that humanity crucifies and transform it. All right? It was an optimistic, hopeful storyline, not a threat. When you read everything in terms of a threat, you just don't, it's not good news. It's not really the gospel. It's the way young parents must raise their children, although the young parents today seem to be doing much better at that. But my generation, we were raised by threats. So I know it lasted at least till the 1950s. That was the way you parented children. You threatened them. So the church just largely copied that, you know. The way to get you people in control, we clergy learned it very quickly, was to threaten you with hellfire and damnation and excommunication, and you can't go to Mass on Sunday or communion. And it worked. That's the sad thing, it worked. Drove a lot of people away, but threats work. It's the lowest level of motivation, fear, but the trouble is then it keeps the whole church at the lowest level of motivation. People who are not love-motivated, but fear-motivated. You create the entry gate. And when the entry gate itself is fear, who comes in? People who are fear-based. Not people who really want to serve the world or care about their neighbor or so forth. And I just say that out of experience of being spiritual director to so many Christians over the years. And when they first discover that fear teaches nothing and has nothing to offer, and they first start gliding in the flow of divine love, it's like a new and different person because they're drawing upon a different source of motivation. So what I want to say is that the final chapter of the resurrection is God's promise so we can live in hope. The end put in the middle so we can know where this story is heading. Without it, I can see why the late great planet Earth, the stories of Apocalypse Now and Armageddon and Rapture take over. But once that takes over, and Christianity itself is not giving Western civilization a hopeful, optimistic, meaningful storyline, we end up with the cynicism we have today. I mean, I think we all know. I'm not revealing anything you haven't thought. We are living in an entirely angry country, right? Where people are just looking for reasons to be angry, over-opinionated about everything. That's what happens when you don't teach contemplation. When you don't teach how to detach from your own opinions and your own feelings and your own ideas about everything. So, what I discovered only in writing this book, it's probably 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul goes to the greatest length to talk about what he calls the meaning of the resurrection. And the line that we preachers always quote is chapter 15, verse 14. If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless and your faith is useless. That makes all of us feel, suitably bad about ourselves. It's funny, and when you threaten people, they remember it. Like Matthew 25 is all about loving the least of the brothers and sisters, but dang it, Matthew, who likes threats the most of all of the evangelists, he ends that beautiful call to serve the least of the brothers and sisters. Those of you who don't do it will be thrown into the lake of fire. And I can just see it when I'm reading the gospel. Everybody just freezes. It's like collective PTSD. And the whole beautiful gospel is forgotten because Matthew loves to end with a threat. Almost our entire theology of hell comes from Matthew's gospel. And I'm not against Matthew's gospel, but we got to know, I can pretty much guess how Matthew was parented. He thinks the only way to motivate people is to threaten them, and it works at low-level motivation. But anyway, when I was studying this chapter in preparation for this book, no preacher or teacher ever pointed out to me the previous sentence. And the previous sentence, 1 Corinthians 15:13, says, if there is no resurrection, Christ himself cannot have been raised. Are you following me? I know it takes... He's saying it isn't the one-time anomaly of Jesus' resurrection that proves all the rest of us are going to be raised up. It's just the opposite. Jesus is the pattern of what's true everywhere. Got it? He's the revelation in one symbolic form. Now, you know what's helping us now? Science. Science that used to be our enemy is becoming our best friend. Because any scientist worth his salt knows that nothing really dies. Everything only changes form. If you've ever been to a Catholic funeral, it's in the preface of the Mass. It says, life is not ended, it merely changes, The whole world, church should just stop and say, what did he just say? Life does not end, it merely changes. Everything changes forms. That's the word transformation, the changing of forms. In the scientific world, from vapor to liquid to solid. But they tell us that the same atoms are in the universe that were in the universe in the first moments after the Big Bang. They just keep changing form. No landscape is final, the geologists tell us. You think Denver always looked like this, go back a million years. And that's true. We go on the top of our Sandia Mountains in Albuquerque, and we find shells up there on the top rocks, 4,000 feet up. What, was there a lake up there? I guess there was. Now, scientists can believe this better than clergy can today, that the pattern of the universe is constant transformation to different states. And all we're trying to do is make ourselves ready and available for being transformed into love. So most only remember the negative verse, or not really negative, but that it all depends on believing in Christ's resurrection. So we use the resurrection to believe that Jesus was God. If you believe that he was raised, this must mean he's God. No, it's to reveal the pattern of reality, that God's work is to transform human suffering. And so we are saved by the death and resurrection of Jesus. Now, you've all been taught that if you've been raised Christian. But the important word there is not death, it's not resurrection, it's and. And it's equally hard to believe in both. When the death comes in all of its multitudinous forms, it's very hard to trust the dying, because we never know what's on the other side. But I'm finding in our pessimistic worldview today, it's even harder for people to believe in resurrection. Our cynicism doesn't allow it. We're just convinced it's all going to hell in a handbasket. And we might as well join in the slide downward because there's not much upward around. Again, I repeat what I said earlier. It's very hard to give individual people hope when the whole thing is hopeless. So the gospel was first of all meant to be a corporate, historical, social, collective message about where history is going. And Christ becomes the icon and map of that journey. That's what it means to believe in Jesus Christ. Look at the journey of Jesus in its small form and then transform that to the universal collective form that we find in Christ. If you got both, you got a good life map. I'm telling you, you're basically indestructible. You can't fall into cynicism, bitterness, hatred. It doesn't make sense anymore. It's not your being. I was glad you mentioned Teilhard de Chardin earlier, Teilhard says, who was a geologist, the very physical structure of the universe, I'm sure Ilya told you this. Was she here last year? Yeah. And she's much more a scientist. I'm not one at all. The very physical structure of the universe is love. If you doubt that, just, watch for springtime. I know we're watching for it today, aren't we? And it will happen. But watch the animals care for their young. Watch the phenomenon of photosynthesis, every little green thing learning how to transform sunlight into energy. It's just everything is insistent upon the perpetuation of life, and life in ever new forms. But the whole universe illustrates that, not believers as well as the universe in many ways. So the early Franciscans taught, building on Francis was not a theologian. He was an uneducated Italian layman who was just a spiritual genius intuitively. So then he was followed by several intellectuals, one being St. Bonaventure, another being John Duns Scotus, who took his intuition and tried to make a distinctive philosophy out of it. And Bonaventure would put it this way: the first Bible is creation. The first time God spoke was, we have a word for it now. We call it the Big Bang. That's the birth of the Christ. 13.6 billion years ago, give a few years or take, all right? God was not waiting and doing nothing for 13.6 billion years. And then the later one said, if you miss the first incarnation, if you think you can ravage and destroy and pollute and misuse this first incarnation, then the second Bible will do you little good. I mean, my education is in the Bible. I love the Bible. I love to get people excited about the Bible, but I think you can make a strong case that the Bible has been used to legitimate as much evil in history as it has good. That's not hard even to prove. Apartheid, slavery itself, justified by the Bible. You talk about not believing in original goodness. Well, not black people. We always had a group that it didn't apply to. So we have to begin with original blessing, original goodness, that you and I, no matter how sinful and egocentric we are, we can't tamper with it. You can't play with it. It doesn't go up and down. It's universal, it's absolute, And it doesn't depend on skin color, gender, or nationality, or how much money you make, or whether you wear nice clothes. Those are all what Thomas Keating would call, and many of us would call, the false self. I mean, the reason we have, let's pick on gender, the huge gender wars we're having in this country, is we thought gender itself applied to the true self. Gender is false self. Gender is your false self is what's going to pass away when you pass away. What does Jesus say? No offense or worry to you who are married, but he says in heaven there will be no marriage or giving in marriage. It's a universal love, a universal intimacy. And the loves we have in this world are simply schools and training grounds. We're practicing for heaven, as many of the saints said. But because we let gender and nationality and ethnicity and good looks and capable body become the true self, we've justified prejudices against every one of these groups. The group that knows it the least, you know what I'm going to say. White people who are comfortable and have able bodies, all right? We've just never felt the pinch. I say this to brown people or yellow people or black people, and they're just all, oh yeah, because they've known what it is to be excluded. You almost have to pray, brothers and sisters, to find the place in life where you are excluded. The place where you're not immediately welcomed and patted on the back and called normal and right and good. That, for many people, is the entranceway, and I mean this sincerely, the entranceway for finally understanding the gospel. Where they can't use it for privilege, they can only use it for healing. Because they need that healing so deeply, as Pope Francis is so beautifully saying about the Eucharist itself. And of course, the cardinals and bishops, some of them, are fighting him on it. The Eucharist is not prize for the perfect. The Eucharist is not a reward for good behavior. What made it into that? It's medicine for the sick. And we all come to the altar because we're sick. We're wounded. Those of us who don't know we're sick are those of us who think we're the grand normal. So it's dangerous to be too normal. Because it's always defined by culture anyway. It's not objective truth. It's what your culture, your group, your dominant group says is normal. So those who've been kicked out of normalcy or denied normalcy normally will either become very cynical, angry, bitter, and tired, and understandably so, but still regretfully so, or they'll find God. Any of you who are in the 12-step programs know what I'm talking about. They weren't stupid. When they made the first step, you've got to experience you're powerless. Much wiser than most churches. We try to be powerful. Yeah, I'm saved. I'm born again. I'm right. I'm orthodox. That will never be an entranceway to the gospel, because it's all about you. It's not about love. It's about asserting yourself and your own superiority. But we're all learning this in spite of ourselves, I think, just because it's hard for us, given the evidence, to keep asserting that we're saved and other people are not. So, if the first Bible is creation, then people have had access to the divine, have had access to God since the very beginning, right? Now, the normal paths of transformation, I talk about this in the Naked Now book and some of the other ones I don't remember, are great love and great suffering. That's available to everybody on this planet. You don't have to join the Lutheran Church or the Catholic Church or any church to participate in great love and great suffering. You can avoid great love and great suffering being a perfectly Orthodox Catholic. Mass every Sunday, obeying all the commandments, and never participating in the flow of love. And finally, great love and great suffering are the same thing. If you love anybody deeply, you will suffer as certain as the dawn. Absolutely. They become one and the same. Now, contemplation, and as you know, that's what our organization in Albuquerque and yours here in Colorado is both trying to teach. It is to maintain over the long haul in your mind and your heart what you learned in the short run in great love and great suffering. Let me explain. I hope you've all had a honeymoon period in your life where you just thought you were walking on air and you loved him, her so much. It was good. Reality was good. You were good. Life was good. But it doesn't last. Right? You can't maintain the honeymoon. You can't. Get over it. It will not be sustained. You finally have to choose to love the other, not because they're perfect, but because you have learned how to love. And what you're learning in contemplation is to maintain that inner freedom from your own ego, from your own anger, your own narcissism. You start recognizing all those things. And you say, I'm doing it again. I'm doing it again. I'm taking any path but love to justify myself and to assert myself over the other. We all do it. I don't think there's any exceptions. So we can't say, and I'm sure Contemplative Outreach is not saying this, that the only people who are going to know God are people who can sit on a mat 20 minutes twice a day. If that's true, I mean, I try myself, but if that's true, 99% of the people ever created are never going to know God, huh? But some of you are going to be called, and I hope a lot of you, to go on that path, to be teachers and examples and models to the world of what freedom feels like, what freedom looks like, what love feels like, what love looks like. You don't take offense like everybody else. You're not over-opinionated like most Americans. You're not needing to prove you're right and the other denominations are wrong. What a waste of time, huh? Why would you want to prove that? Why would you need to prove that? Your ego wants that, but not your soul. Your soul has the least interest, no interest, in proving that you're right and someone else is wrong. And it even gets worse when you waste your time thinking, because I've proven you're wrong, that makes me right. Isn't that stupid? Just concentrate on how wrong you are and how terrible you are. That automatically raises me to the heights of heaven. I think half of America thinks that way. Just listen to the news. It's just attacking. But when we were taught to live out of fear and needing to be right, so-called orthodoxy, we ended up not being orthodox at all. So let's first learn how to honor what's right beneath our feet, what's right around us. When I teach the contemplative mind, I say, how you do anything is how you do everything. I want to repeat it. How you do anything is how you do everything. So just watch yourself when you're doing nothing. And where does your mind go? That's who you are. I'm sorry to have to tell you that. If the first thing that jumps into your mind is to want to resent somebody, accuse somebody, dismiss somebody, attack somebody, even in your mind, that's who you are. And we all are that until we've learned how to love. When you can learn to let go of that, I don't need that, I don't need that. I don't need to define myself in opposition to anybody. You will find yourself moving toward resurrection. Now, I'm going to give you an almost simplistic visual image for this. And to some of you educated ones, it'll almost sound childish, and maybe it is. But in the living school, I tell the students to picture 3 boxes. The first box is called order. The second box is called disorder. The third box is called reorder. That's what it means, stay with me, to be saved by the death and resurrection of Jesus. To go through the whole journey. Let me explain. A lot of people think that what it means to be saved is just to stay in the first box. The way the world was first described to you, like it was to me as a little 6-year-old boy in Kansas, It was so lovely, and I came from a very healthy family and happy family, and we were all Catholic, and we were all Democrats, and nobody got divorced in our entire huge farm family on either side. We didn't know what divorce was. It was order, 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 order. I never missed Mass on Sunday. I wouldn't have thought of it, And it all worked as long as I stayed in Kansas. With Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, It was all just so lovely. But then I had to go off to Cincinnati to join the Franciscans and start meeting a bigger world where everybody didn't think the way I thought. Everybody didn't come from the background I came from. To meet my first examples of disorder. It's hard. It's hard. You mean the rules that I was given aren't always true all the time? No, they aren't. I don't care how you create your first salvation project, as Thomas Merton called it, your first little world of how I can be perfect and saved and superior. That's all the ego wants, to be superior and to be separate. That's all it wants. And it will use Colorado culture, it will use marijuana, it will use anything, to feel separate and superior than anybody else. When you stop doing that, you'll start seeing that all the world isn't just like you. Let me put it in a more direct way. You're not the center of the world. You're not the center of anything, all right? That's the great defeat for the ego that the person over-addicted to box one will not allow. Will not allow. The story I've usually told in that regard when I was still pastor in Cincinnati in my first 15 years, I had been working with this young, beautiful, not so young, middle-aged, a Polish couple who were super Catholic and followed all the rules, and dear, loving people. But then they came to me one day in tears that their daughter came home and told them she was a lesbian. Right? They were just in tears. What do we do? What do we do? Is our daughter going to go to hell? Tell us she's not going to go to hell. It just broke my heart what we had to work through to get them out of their first box of order. Now they are the most loving, universally compassionate couple. They're in the third box now. They're very old. But it took the cross to get them there. It takes us so many years to learn wisdom, to learn that the world doesn't have to follow our rules to be in God's hands. So I'm telling you, every one of you in this room, I don't care if you're of the liberal persuasion or conservative persuasion, you will have to go through some disorder. Something you can't explain, fix, understand, make right. It is what it is, what it is, what it is, damn it. All right, damn it. And that's called carrying the cross. It is what it is, and I can't make it different. Most of you already have faced it, probably several times. But some face it and learn nothing from it. They just run back to their first box, So conservatives tend to get trapped in the first box. Perpetual order that isn't really true at all. This is what we call fake news today. Just make up words, whatever you want it to be, so my worldview can be maintained at all costs. This is common. But you liberals are not off the hook, all right? Liberal, progressive, academic, educated people tend to get trapped in the second box. Perpetual and grand cynicism about everything and everybody. I'm smart, I understand, those people are stupid, those people are stupid, those people are stupid. Only people like me who are educated and democratic and white were the enlightened ones. You've got to know the disorder box is as much a trap, sometimes even worse, because you feel so superior to those damn people in the first box. You say, who still believe all those silly Catholic things and those stupid Protestant things that I used to believe. But I've gone beyond that. So you take pride in your chosen world of disorder. Huh? There's no coherence. There's no worldview. And this is the Democratic Party today. You know, they can't really stand for anything because they stand for everything and nothing, as it were, at the same time. It's just as bad as the other. And the rare group is the third box, reorder. To learn and hold on to what was good about the first box. It wasn't all garbage. You take such superior delight in throwing it all out. No, you got to retrieve. Ken Wilber, who lives here in your city, calls it transcend and include. And you can't transcend unless you include what was good about all the previous stages of your life. It was never 100% bad. Your dad wasn't 100% bad. Your mother wasn't. Your church wasn't. Colorado isn't. This is the great forgiveness. And when you've walked with Christ through death and come out on the other side, you know something, hear me, you know something that you can't know in any other way. So resurrection is not death avoided, hear me, it's death transformed, right? If you spend your whole life avoiding the dyings to your ego, to your self-centeredness, to your superiority, you'll never learn anything. It's death experienced but turned around. That's how Jesus saves us. That's how Jesus broadens the mind and the heart into compassion and freedom, so you can love all things as God does. I call God in the book the great allower. It's really scandalous how much God allows. God is complicit in evil. Did you ever think of that? Why didn't God stop the Holocaust? Why? Doesn't that make you angry? Why doesn't God stop these men raping little girls? Why? I don't understand it. It's just so wrong. It's so stupid. But remember when we talked, if you were here 3 years ago, about God, Bonaventure's image of the Trinity was a water wheel, infinitely flowing, pouring out, swinging back, being filled up. Pouring out, being filled up, never stopping. And we were given half of the definition of God. God was almighty, outpouring. But that God was self-emptying. And actually, every bit of sadness since the killing of Abel, the first murder supposedly, God has been in solidarity with, suffering with, participating with. That doesn't make sense to the logical mind. But for some reason, it makes sense to the mystic. That there's only one suffering, and we're all participating in it. There's only one resurrection, and we're all participating in it. That's what I mean by corporate historical salvation. It's one mystery that Jesus walked through and said, you can trust it. It's not going to kill you, as it doesn't kill me. And you can allow it. But it is and will always feel, even as many times as you go through it, it will feel like a letting go. It will feel like an allowing. Should I trust it one more time? And I can't convince you should, but I think that's what it means to live in faith. It doesn't mean to recite the Apostles' Creed on Sunday. I hope you do. That's great. Gets you started. I have to admit, the easiest path is to begin conservative with order. Your children and your grandchildren are going to grow up with much greater difficulty because they started in the box of disorder. When I was born in 43, it was all order, 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 order. We all held together then. Wonderful way to grow up. Not such a good way to continue because I couldn't deal with the complexity of the world. I got to preach in 46 countries over the years, and all my rules always got broken. It isn't always true what you want to believe. It isn't always true. And believe me, I dawdled a lot in the second box. I hope I'm not coming across that way here, because that wouldn't be faith. But to just be a permanent cynic, permanently depressed, permanently negative, permanently dismissive. What you want to watch for is the demon of dismissal, where you just, he's not worth the time of day. She's not in my league. She's not. That's arrogance at its height. Watch for that tendency to want to dismiss whole groups, whole nations, whole races, whole genders. Hatred will find some category in which to justify itself. And when you hate, just remember it's saying much more about you than the object that you're hating. It's saying you are a hateful person. That God does not descend to hate. I don't understand it. I can't wait to ask. Why? Why do you allow this and even find grace and freedom in it? So the goal for all of us is the third box. Reorder is another word for resurrection. And this is the goal of all religion. This is we call it enlightenment, we call it transformation, we call it conversion, we call it heaven. We made it into a geographical place. One of you quoted to me last night where Pope John Paul II, no liberal by any means, but a wise man in many, many ways. He said, I even know the date he said it, June 28th, 1999, he said, when will Catholics realize heaven and hell are not geographical places? They're states of consciousness. Pope John Paul II, if you care to be impressed by a pope, okay? When will Catholics understand heaven and hell are not geographical places? They're states of consciousness. And I hope it's not very true, but I would be willing to bet there's people in this room hearing me right now who are in hell. Who just keep choosing to hate. Keep choosing to resist. Keep choosing to not trust love. That's hell. But it's not something you experience afterwards. It's something you're allowing now. You're either practicing for heaven or you're practicing for hell. Now we have 3 popes in a row, by the way, because Benedict said it. You know how he said it? He gave his commentary on the Apostles' Creed. And when he got to that line, and he descended into hell, this is Benedict, about as conservative as you can ask for. He said, well, what that means, and that's exactly what this icon is saying, he must have read the Eastern Fathers. He said, if Christ descended there, it means it doesn't exist anymore. Christ and hell cannot coexist. Read Benedict's commentary. That was called the harrowing of hell, the leveling of it, the cleaning of it out, the destroying of death, the undoing of it. Choose whatever verb works best for you. But now Pope Francis said it just 2 weeks ago, and of course everybody's upset that he said it. He said, hell, I don't think there is such a place. Of course, both of the Teresas said that, Teresa of Avila and Therese of Lisieux. You know how they said it? Even more cleverly, as only women can. And Therese of Lisieux was quoting Teresa of Avila. It's not that I don't believe in hell. It's just I don't think anybody's there. So why are they saying such outrageous things? Because they know that infinite love will win. God doesn't lose. The way some of the early fathers said is, anybody, even if it's the first nanosecond after your death, once you see infinite love, nobody can resist it. That's what we Catholics really meant by purgatory. I know our literalism of 5 years in the fire because 5 years of sinfulness, that's retributive justice, you understand? But there was an intuition we had when we talked about purgatory. It was saying God can even get at the soul in the death agony and the moments after death. Why not? Why not? Of course. Infinite love will find infinite ways So for me, the question of salvation is not a question of if, it's a question of when. And you're the lucky people who are getting it early. Do you see what I mean? That's all. You're just lucky. You're blessed. You're free. You can start practicing heaven now, enjoying heaven now, and that's going to show in a very different lifestyle. It won't be based in anger and fear and judgment and excluding the gays or whoever you want to exclude. The exclusion instinct falls away. You just don't have much need for that anymore. And it comes back to what I was saying before about the true self, false self. Once you fall into the true self, the little petty arguments of the false self become rather meaningless. You don't have time to go there. So, back to that 1 Corinthians I said I was going to read, and then I didn't anyway. Yeah, so my point I wanted to make was that if resurrection is the universal pattern, if God is transforming everything into life, then we've got to see the resurrection of Christ is not a miracle, so we will believe in the truth of the Christian religion, which is what we've been stuck with. And of course, you can never prove it. It's the only scene in the life of Christ that is not pictured. All we have is after the resurrection. Mary Magdalene, so forth. But there's no picturing of the moment. I remember asking my systematics professor about that. Well, what would we have seen if a camera had been there at the moment of the resurrection? He says, I think you would have seen one body morph into universal light. And that's why all the metaphors used for the risen Christ are light. That means Christ is in this room. Christ is another name for everything. So what is the Christ mystery? God decided to inhabit matter, to reveal himself, herself, itself through physicality, materiality, sexuality. We call that sacramentalism in Catholic theology. That's God's hiding place, and that's God's revealing place. That's the Christ. Whenever matter is revealing spirit, you're touching Christ. Did you hear me? I just said it. I won't say anything better all day. All right? And whenever you allow spirit to be mediated to you through looking at an animal, looking at a tree, looking at your beautiful mountains of Colorado, when you allow them to draw you into ecstasy, you are encountering Christ. As some of you know, I'm sure 3 years ago when I was here, I always talked about my dog. I had to put her down last March. And I could say without any doubt Venus was her name. Venus taught me real presence. The Baltimore Catechism didn't teach me real presence. Any of you have a dog, you know what I'm saying. I mean, her capacity to be present to me is just phenomenal. And I don't know what pleasure she got out of it, just watching me and wanting to, if I'd get up for a sick call at 3 a.m, I'm going with you. I don't care, anything to be present to me, This is learned everywhere in nature, in the natural world, because the natural world doesn't have all these filters. It's bare revelation. It's naked revelation. I sincerely believe what your own Bill Plotkin teaches from here in Durango, that every lesson that the soul needs is held in the natural world. And that's why initiation rites are always done in nature. Just send the boy for 3 months into nature and tell him to keep his eyes open. And he'll learn all he needs to know. That's not an unchristian religion. That's the heart of incarnationalism. Do you see? But now incarnation is universal. The Word became flesh, not just the Word became Jesus. That's a very different understanding. I know for many of you, that feels, first of all, like dangerous or secular. It will make you love Jesus even more because you'll see the Christ mystery in everything. Everything can open the heart space. Everything can open the mind space. Everything can teach you letting go and death because nature submits to death much more easily than we do. We're the only species that fights it, apparently. Almost all animals die horrible deaths, did you know that? Almost all animals. Unless they have a good vet nearby. But most of them never did. They just go into the forest and die. I remember when I had to put Venus down. Elias, you were with me. And, you know, I'm sobbing like a baby. And she just, honestly, I'm not making this up. She put her two little paws. I don't know if she knew what she was doing, but I knew what she was doing. It was just total surrender to the mystery. She knew for 6 months she was dying, and I just didn't want to believe it. You've all gone through this with your dogs, you know. You don't want to catch the signals, and she just keeps staring at me like, I'm ready to go, but I'd look the other way. I didn't want to believe it. So all I'm saying is be attentive, be contemplative to everything. I'm not trying to make pagans out of you. I'm trying to make Christians out of you. So you'll see it's one coherent world. It's one cosmos. The word cosmos in Greek means harmony, one harmonious whole, and nothing is to be dismissed. Nothing is secular. Ron Rolheiser writes much better than I do. He says, so-called secularism is the inevitable child of incarnational Christianity. Once you recognize God is in all things, there's no place where you can't find God, you will become, well, you'll discover what Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran theologian and martyr, called religionless Christianity. I think that's what's emerging on this earth. I mean, I still love to dress up and say Mass if it's going to help the people, but I mean, it doesn't help me much anymore, I'll tell you. All this dressing up and being reported for not using the right words, and it's just a minefield. You know, it doesn't keep you in your heart space at all because it's argumentative. So we turn even the 7 sacraments into arguments. Huh? Well, go sit in the forest and look at a dead tree for half an hour. There's nothing to argue about. You know? You just got to, what does this tree have to tell me? Why this tree is just laying there, apparently accepting its necessary death. And look, there's a little sprout coming out of that end of the tree already. It's already moving from disorder to reorder. Every lesson the soul needs can be learned in the natural world. Now, our ancestors, like mine, were all German farmers. My guess is they became contemplative a lot more easily when you lived close to the land. Francis wanted us to be barefoot all the time. Finally, he conceded to sandals, but we weren't supposed to wear shoes, and I have real nice shoes on this morning, too. And why did he want us to walk barefoot? So we would be in immediate contact with Mother Earth. I mean, now you don't have times of prayer. You can do what Paul said in Thessalonians. You can pray always. There's no time you cannot pray. I remember my novice master saying to me, he said, is it a sin to smoke while you're praying? I said, yes. In those days we smoked. You know. Well, not as novices, but beforehand we did. He said, what about praying while you're smoking? Oh, that's okay. Do you get it? It's all perspective. It's all praying while you're smoking. Well, isn't he a holy man, you know? But smoking while you're praying, no. Where the cosmic Christ is going to lead you is to live in one coherent world. Everything's a lesson. Everything's a gift. Everything's a grace. There's nothing that cannot lead you to God. Even sadness, death, they end up leading you the most. The things we hate the most and fear the most end up teaching us the most. So I'm very orthodox. Every one of your churches has said we are saved by the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's all I'm saying. But I'm teaching you where to look for the death and resurrection of Jesus. And what you're going to see is it's the universal pattern. It's everything. It's all the time. It never stops. Jesus' first words in at least two of the Gospels when he begins his public ministry, and it's very unfortunately translated repent in a lot of Bibles. Going back to Jerome in the early centuries, who translated it penitentia, which means, punish yourself. But the real word, and I'm sure other preachers better than I have told you, the real Greek word is metanoia. It means change your mind. The first words out of Jesus' mouth are change your mind. And yet religion as it has become is by and large, and you can't fight me on this too much, by and large people who hate change. People who love the status quo. Who give me that old-time religion when God was God back in 1900. Of course, they never lived there, so it's easy to say, It's always this love of the past. Pope Francis calls it running an antique shop and trying to sell antiques, and old things are always better. Let me make this very contemporary. There is no such thing as an apolitical position. When people say, oh, he's talking politics now, do you know to say nothing is to affirm the status quo? That's political. When you say everything is beautiful, all is wonderful, all is okay, and maintain your purity. Oh, I'm not political. I'm neither Republican nor Democrat nor independent nor anything. You actually are political by your naivete, by refusing to call evil, evil, and good, good. You're burdened with doing that, which means half of the humanity is never going to like you. We used to kick my mother under the table. She'd start talking about the Republicans at the Thanksgiving dinner, and we'd say, Mother, shut up. But she was an 8 on the Enneagram, and you know what 8s are like, huh? They're going to say what they need to say no matter what. So I think I'm getting off the point. Richard, get back to your point. Oh, we're almost at the end, yeah. What I want to do, if I can, and you'll allow me, after lunch, is I want to use 2 biblical examples. I don't know which chapters I should most be giving you, but toward the end, I think it's chapter 14, I have a chapter on Mary Magdalene and Paul. And I want to unpackage those 2 for you because they exemplify coming at the mystery by 2 different paths. Mary Magdalene knew Jesus and loved Jesus. At the very last, on the day of resurrection, she learns to love the Christ. Paul never knew Jesus. A lot of us don't realize that. Do you know he never quotes Jesus directly or successfully? Never once. And when the few times he tries, it's a bungled quote, if you listen to what Matthew, Mark, and Luke say. So I don't know what these biblical inerrancy people do with saying there's no false word in the Bible. The Bible is filled with contradictions. All you got to do is use your common sense. That doesn't make it uninspired, but this would be a good example. Paul never quotes Jesus correctly, and hardly at all. So my point will be, and I'll try to make it after lunch, Paul knew Christ, and he never knew Jesus. And that's why, in my opinion, he became the major teacher of the New Testament after the Gospels. Because that's the way you and I come. You and I don't know Jesus in the flesh, but you know this light all around us. Right? This light that is showing itself through every material thing, and we call it spirit. You and I know the Christ, and that leads us to Jesus. Got it? So I hope we can give you ways where you can trust that Christ mystery, can lead you back to the Jesus mystery, who always brings the lesson home and makes it very personal and practical. Thank you again, and please pray to the Spirit to fill in your minds all the terrible things I said. All right. So you'll know I'm not a heretic.